Well, croeso to Wrexham News. This is actually episode 6, so the time has flown. We've actually got to episode 6 fairly quickly. And this week we're going to be talking about the Senedd elections next year and the new electoral system. But before we get going, start with some introductions. I'm Carrie Harper. I'm a councillor for Plaid Cymru in Cllr Park.
And I'm the Plaid Cymru councillor for Grosvenor Ward.
I'm Becca Martin, and I'm the Plaid Cymru councillor for the Axon and Maesa Dre ward.
I'm Kayleigh Unitt, and I'm a TikToker.
Welcome, everybody. So as I said, next year, Senedd elections in May, there are going to be some quite big changes, though. So what we're going to do today is talk people through what the key changes are and how they're going to work. So basically, there's 3 main changes on the way. So we're going to have a change in terms of the electoral system. So we're going to have a proportional system, which basically better reflects the way people vote in a nutshell. The second big change is the size of constituencies. So constituencies are going to be a lot bigger. And the other change is the fact that we'll be going from 60 to 96 members of the Senedd. So if we start with the system, basically what it means is the amount of seats a party gets better reflects the percentage of the vote. So it is a fairer system. It's not a perfect system, and I'm sure we'll discuss that there are better ways potentially of doing this, but it is progress, and it's definitely a better reflection of the way people are voting, so it's an improvement. The second change, the constituencies then. So at the moment, we've got 32 Westminster constituencies. Those are going to be paired into 16 super constituencies, if you like. So to give a local example, the Wrexham constituency will be paired with neighbouring Allen and Deeside, and each super constituency will elect 6 members of the Senedd. So those are the big changes. There's quite a lot going on. I suppose one of the most controversial aspects that people will have heard about is the fact that we're going from 60 to 96 members of the Senedd. So there's a question there, why do we need more politicians? And electing more politicians is never particularly going to be a popular idea, but there is actually a sound logic underpinning why this change needs to happen. So just as an example, Scotland's got a population of 5.5 million people. They elect 129 members of the Scottish Parliament. Northern Ireland Assembly, population of 1.9 million. They elect 90 members to the Northern Ireland Assembly. Wales, with a population of 3.2 million, at the moment, we're just electing 60 members of the Senedd. And there's an issue there when you don't have enough people to actually do the work, isn't there?
I think this is where it starts to fall down. Nobody's going to argue that, electing more politicians is popular. But when you look at the alternative to democracy, which is dictatorship, perhaps you accept that democracy costs,
Yeah.
And when you consider we've got the same amount of councillors almost as we've got Senedd members, looking after vastly smaller areas. And we know how difficult that can be at times, to represent 3,000 or 4,000 people. But when you're looking at what we're planning to do here, I think it means you're going to have better scrutiny. Because I think that the criticism is with 60 members of the Senedd, quarter of them are in government. So then they have to be scrutinised by the other 3/4. And there's just not enough people to do that adequate scrutiny. And for example, to give an example, one of the most controversial pieces of legislation passed in the Senedd in the past couple of years has been 20 miles an hour. There we go there. Now, there's a school of thought which says that had that been scrutinised more thoroughly going through the legislative process by more people, you might have come up with a better solution, and you wouldn't have had that kind of massive backlash. You wouldn't have had the massive issues that we had. You wouldn't have had the differences within the various councils in terms of the way they interpreted it.
It was a postcode lottery, basically, wasn't it?
Because you might have had, more thorough scrutiny, at an earlier stage. That's the argument. And when you think of the cost of that one piece of legislation, which wasn't properly implemented, in my view, it's going to cost £30 million. We're talking about £30 million over the course of 5 years for the additional Senedd members. And also, let's not beat around the bush here. There's an awful lot being made about 36 extra members. We've got 800 unelected lords, which we don't talk about. And had I done my research properly for this podcast, I'd have worked out how much it did actually cost. But I'm sure we can Google it. I'm sure there's a way to put the sum up later. But that sort of cost never gets mentioned. The £1 billion to revamp the MPs' accommodation, that never gets mentioned. So let's get some perspective here. Democracy costs, unfortunately, but at a time when people are feeling very antagonistic towards politicians, it's never going to go down well, is it?
No, but if you want, as you say, a fit-for-purpose Welsh democracy, it's got to be functional. And there's an argument that there were never enough Senedd members in the first place to actually do the work that needs doing. And when you add to that the extra powers that have been devolved since the Senedd was established in 1999, that workload has just increased. So there is a logic to this, even if it's not a popular policy. If we want the Senedd to work, it's got to be funded properly, and you need enough people to do the scrutiny. You need enough government ministers, quite frankly. Otherwise, you have something that doesn't work. And some people would argue that, maybe that is part of the problem we've got at the moment. But it is going to be different in terms of how it works. So people might want to know a little bit more about the detail in terms of how it's going to function. So Becca, you've got some thoughts in terms of...
Yeah, give me the easy question. So for voters, it's going to remain pretty much the same as what it is now in terms of actually voting. They'll go in, put a cross in the box of the party that they want to vote for. The difference this time for voters will be that they're not voting for a person, they're voting for the party. Now, each mega constituency is going to have 6 members of the Senedd, which means that the parties should, I'm not saying that each party will put up 6 candidates, which will be in the running then to become MSs. The public don't get a say on the order that each party puts those candidates in. The party will decide that. That's the closed list system. So as a branch, we'll decide what order our members will go in, our candidates will go in, and then the public vote for the party that they want to see either in power or representing them on a more local level. Now, the way that the vote is counted is quite complicated. So because there's going to be 6 seats in each constituency, it's taken in 6 rounds. So your first round is quite similar to first past the post. It's the party that has the most votes, they get that first seat. When you go on to the second round, the party that got the most votes has their votes halved. So obviously they're not going to have the most votes now. So the next seat goes to whichever party has now got the most votes.
Okay. Yeah.
So then we go on to the third round, and the same sort of thing happens. So that party now loses half its votes. We go on to the next round. If then it goes back to a party that's already got a seat and they're the next highest, for the next round, they'll lose a third of their votes. If it was a party that hadn't already had a seat, they would lose half. So each round you go through, if you win that seat, your votes get reduced a little bit less. So it does give you a more proportional representation.
It's really complex when you've been used to the first past the post. But first past the post means you can get elected with 30% of the vote and you take 100% of the seat. At least with this, I think if you get 25% of the vote, you will get roughly 25% of the seats.
Yeah.
So I think in that sense, it is a lot fairer. It's going to take a bit to get used to the fact that you've got 6 representatives. But then I think it's a good chance for those 6 to show what they're made of,
In terms of accountability, though, and this is one of the criticisms, isn't it, of this system, people don't get to vote for a particular candidate, do they? They had to vote for the party, and Plaid Cymru would have preferred a system. It's called STV. It works a little bit differently. So although this is progress, it's fairer. it's probably not fully baked, I would argue. What do people think about?
No, it does need to go further. But this is a nice stepping stone because it's like we're going from 2 different ballots for constituency and region to just 1 vote. So it is simpler, and it's complicated with all the numbers when you start working out halving and thirding the votes. But by the time we then get to a point where we could do STV, it might make that transition a bit easier for the public to get their heads around.
And to be honest with you, that's what we've been doing with the regional, and that's what we used to do with the European elections from the get-go. So it has been happening. It's just that people tend to focus on the constituency, which was first past the post. So we're bringing 2 systems together into one. And as you say, I don't think it's quite right, because I think some people will want to vote for a person, a specific person. Very few people are 100% for a party. A lot of people are going, I quite like that person, but I also like that person in a different party. So I'd like to go 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 perhaps, but you haven't got that option yet. And I think very strongly that Plaid Cymru should be looking to introduce that kind of open system
I think so.
if and when we have that chance.
I mean, you just got to get involved in your party and make sure that you are involved in that branch decision of the order of the list, and then get enough people on board voting.
So Senedd elections are going to be a bit different in terms of the age that people can vote from. And I know you've been doing some work on TikTok, Kayleigh, in terms of encouraging people to register for things. Do you want to tell us a little bit?
Yeah, so actually today we're filming this on March 3rd, which is the 4th anniversary of my first ever Senedd countdown. So I did like sort of 75 days out from the election every day using a different trending audio to try and get it to young people, because you can vote from 16, you can register at 14. So it's really important that young people understand that they have that right, and sort of how they can get involved at a local level in those 2 years that they have between registering and actually voting.
So how do they register to vote?
Well, you go to I think it's like a government website, and you just Google how to register to vote in the UK. It's a 5-minute thing. It's literally like 10 minutes. I mean, if you need the help of a parent or a guardian, it's pretty straightforward. They would have hopefully registered at some point, so they should know how to do it.
Do we think that the whole process is quite intimidating? The idea of going into a ballot
Can be.
a polling station and getting your piece of paper and what am I meant to do? Is that, because I feel that puts a lot of people off.
It does. So for the Westminster election, I actually did like a 9-minute walkthrough, like step by step of everything to expect, from queuing outside, turning your phone off, not taking any photos in there. I mean, there's signs everywhere that says that, but some people don't look around them. They just walk straight in and they're like, I've got a job to do. Handing over your information. You don't have to take your polling card with you, but it makes it easier for the people there to find your name, because it's not alphabetical, it goes by house. So the number that comes on your polling card is how they find you on that. And then just walking in and people make a big deal about, do you do it in pen or pencil? They give you pencils because you're less likely to put a hole in the paper. You can take a pen with you, but pens smudge. So just be careful. There's no conspiracy of people rubbing out your vote. If you want to take a pen, but just make sure the ink is like dry before you go folding it and putting it in, just in case. Because we were there on election night, and I was looking through all of the spoiled ballots, and some of them were holes in pages, and that can make it so your vote doesn't count.
I think there's a big point here about putting politics on the curriculums as well, and I think that is, we really need that education running through our schools, really.
I think, I suppose, the other point to get across to people is how seismic this next election could actually be. So we've had
very much so.
We've had Labour for 25 years in power, and polling is showing that there's going to be massive changes at the next election. We had one recent poll which put Plaid Cymru ahead, which obviously
we're on our second now. Are we on our second poll now?
We probably are, yeah. So it's
still
exciting.
Still ahead.
Yeah, still ahead.
But it's very tight. Let's not beat around the bush.
Yeah.
It's incredibly tight. It could go either way. But you do sense that the traditional London parties are collapsing. people have lost a lot of faith in Tory and Labour.
Unsurprisingly.
Finally, it's taken a long time, but they've kind of seen through that. And the important thing now is that people focus on a Welsh alternative that's always going to put Wales first. And unsurprisingly, we're going to argue that that's Plaid Cymru.
I mean, it's not just about how like Labour are acting in Westminster. They were saying during the Westminster campaign that having two Labour-led governments would make a more cohesive system. But as we've just seen with the Crown Estates, they're not actually listening to Welsh Labour. So does it work? No, not really.
Yeah. And we've got this crazy situation where for 14 years we had the Tories refusing to grant a St David's Day holiday, and Labour banging on about it, and then Labour get into power, and all of a sudden Labour don't want it, and you've got the Tories in Wales have got the cheek to call for a St David's Day national holiday, and you're just thinking it's a game to these people, and they treat Wales as a little plaything, and we've really got to get focused on why we need a party that will always put Wales first.
It's one of those things like they go, oh, well, Wales is too small. We're sort of like the little brother to England, and we have like pocket money from them, whatever. But when Blair was in government, the excuse for why they couldn't make it a national holiday was basically that English businesses wouldn't be able to cope for 24 hours without Wales. So is that not a case for independence? Like, there we go. We're financially fine.
I mean, there's some really serious work to do as well. When you look, and we've talked on this podcast about the NHS, we've got the cost of living crisis, there's a housing crisis. You need a party with a plan. It can't just be taglines and populism. You need people in charge of the government who've actually got a vision to get from A to B. And we'd obviously argue that's what's been lacking in terms of Labour, particularly over the last decade. That's not been there, and we've seen marriage decline. But this genuinely is an opportunity to take things in a new direction. So it's important people understand there are going to be changes. It's going to work a little bit differently. But if you want to change the system, if you want to put somebody else in the driving seat, this is your chance.